One rule was supposed to destroy his business. Instead, it built an empire worth £45 million. A council planning officer wrote a single condition into a permission slip, thinking it would quietly finish Jeremy Clarkson off before he ever got started. Nobody in that meeting could have known they were about to write the actual business plan for one of the most successful rural brands in Britain. Here is the part almost nobody puts together. This was not a story about a man getting lucky with a television show. It was a story about a bureaucratic punishment that turned into the single smartest supply chain decision in modern British farming. And the council that wrote it never saw it coming. By the time this is finished, that one planning condition will look less like an obstacle and more like the best gift anyone ever accidentally gave him. Start at the beginning. 2008. Clarkson buys close to 1,000 acres of Cotswold farmland near Chadlington for around £6 million. For over a decade, someone else quietly farms it. Then in 2019, that arrangement ends, and Clarkson decides, against every piece of sound advice available to him, to run it himself. Year 1. Profit: £144, not £1,000. That number matters more than it looks. Hold that thought. A camera crew had been filming the whole thing, and when Amazon released it as Clarkson's farm, something happened that no marketing department could have engineered. 11 million people watched a man fail, honestly and repeatedly, and fell in love with the honesty of it. But the show was never the real turning point. The real turning point came from the one institution in this story that never wanted to help him at all. When Clarkson applied to open a small farm shop at the entrance to his land, West Oxfordshire District Council attached a condition to the permission. Every product sold in that shop had to be sourced from within 16 miles. Read that again. The council's intention was obvious. Limit the range, limit the stock, limit the appeal, and the whole venture quietly fails on its own. It is the kind of condition that has strangled 100 small rural businesses before this one and barely made the local paper. But here is where the story stops behaving the way everyone expected. 16 miles around Chadlington happens to be packed with small producers who had never had a proper retail outlet in their lives. Beekeepers, smallholders, family farms doing good work for nobody but themselves. The council's restriction, designed to choke the shop, instead handed Clarkson a ready-made cooperative of local suppliers he would never have gone looking for on his own. Lisa Hogan later said, with a level of honesty few business partners would risk on camera, that the 16-mile rule turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to them. Think about what that actually means. A council trying to punish ambition accidentally wrote the single most authentic supply chain strategy in modern British retail, and they did it for free. 1 year after opening, the shop's assets jumped from around £44,000 to £1.3 million. Not because of clever branding, because every jar on that shelf could point to a real farm, 3 villages over, that badly needed the business. That is not a coincidence. That is a regulation working exactly backwards. Here is the part that even people who followed this story closely have never fully joined up. Every major move that came after only worked because that first restriction forced a certain kind of honesty into the brand from day one. The pub, The Farmer's Dog, bought for under $1 million and now employing 146 people, runs on the same instinct. Proper, local, no shortcuts. The brewery, Hawkstone, grown from Clarkson's own barley, went from a net worth of £432,000 to over $3 million in a single year. A 600% jump. Heineken and Carlsberg were both offered the chance to back it early. They both said no. Ask yourself why that number matters. It matters because 2 of the largest brewers in the country looked at a product built on total transparency and decided it wasn't worth the risk. The industry that once tried to shut Clarkson out never had to let him back in. He built an audience the industry couldn't touch, and a supply chain the rulebook accidentally handed him. Now the brand sits somewhere north of £75 million, with more than $20 million in annual sales. The whole operation, farm included, is worth somewhere around £45 million. Built from a field that made £144 the year he took it over himself. Everything looked settled until one detail didn't fit. This year, Diddley Squat Produce went national through Ocado. For the first time, you don't need to drive to a single track lane in Oxfordshire to buy any of it. And that should have been the moment the 16-mile rule finally broke the brand, the moment scale swallowed the local story that built it. It didn't, because the story was never really about the 16 miles. It was about what the rule taught the business to become. Honest sourcing, real relationships, provenance that could survive a camera pointed directly at it. That habit scaled. The rule that was meant to be a ceiling turned out to be a foundation. Consider the math for a moment. A council wrote a restriction to make growth harder. Instead, it wrote the training manual for a business that now sits on national supermarket shelves without losing a shred of what made it work in a barn in the first place. And this is where the council reappears, right at the point they probably assumed they'd been forgotten. Diddley Squat is hosting cereals this year, one of the UK's largest arable trade events, with 25 to 30,000 working farmers expected through the gate. Not tourists, the actual industry. On land that same council spent years trying to restrict, right down to refusing a proper car park for the shop for as long as they could manage it. The event's own director admitted, on record, that hosting it here would draw exactly the attention British arable farmers need right now, attention no amount of official campaigning has managed to generate in 30 years. That is not a small irony. That is the entire story, folded back on itself. The very council whose planning condition was designed to limit this farm's reach is now watching that farm become the single most important stage in British agriculture for 1 week this summer. They provided the constraint. He turned it into the culture. And there is a quieter number underneath all of this that rarely gets said out loud. Agricultural land in this country can pass to the next generation free of inheritance tax, provided it is genuinely farmed. A man reportedly worth around £55 million is sitting on a farm worth $12.5 million and rising, an asset that appreciates twice over, once as land, once as story. That was never written into any planning document, but it is exactly the kind of quiet, patient thinking that turns a restriction into a legacy. So here is the actual lesson buried under the headlines about beer deals and supermarket shelves. You cannot manufacture the trust this brand has. You can only earn it, slowly, in public, sometimes because a bureaucrat handed you the blueprint by accident. A council wrote a rule to limit a farm. The farm used it to build a nation's trust instead. If you've made it this far, you already know this story is bigger than one farm shop. So tell me honestly, do you think that 16-mile rule was the smartest accident in modern British farming? Or was Clarkson always going to find a way to make it work? Drop your answer below and subscribe if you want the next chapter of this story the moment it happens.